Hey everybody, this is Zachary Jeans. Let's keep walking through the Bible. So today is day 419 and we are finishing up 1 Samuel. We're going to look at chapters 28 through 31 and we're going to look at some dark stuff, some pretty interesting dark stuff. And it might challenge your view or your maybe the way in which some of those things have been taught to you through the Bible. Because here we have the Bible talking about some odd stuff. And then we're going to look at David. And David goes and delivers those he loves and his people from a surprise attack while he was off being sort of kicked around by the Philistine commanders who were not so happy that he was fighting in their ranks. So, and then we'll close up with Saul. And Saul's going to eat it. He is going to die, as was prophesied and he knew was coming. So, that said, he took a dishonorable way out. It's pretty sad. But we're going to go ahead and finish up 1 Samuel today. If you get a second, hit that like button or whatever it is, a heart. And I do want to say thank you. Thank you to those who are taking the time to support me financially. I don't do that a lot. I try to do it every 3 or 4 episodes. If you do want to join those that are doing that financial side of things, again, everything will always be free here. It's not because you get some extra benefit. It's just you want to throw a few shekels my way, buy me coffee or whatever. You can do that. It's ko-fi.com and then the / and you write Zachary Jeans. So ko-fi.com/Zachary Jeans. And again, you know who you are. Thank you so much. All right. Hey, let's stop. Let's pray and hit that pause button and go ahead and listen 1 Samuel chapter 28 through 31, okay? And then come back and we'll get going. Lord, I love you. God, thanks for your word. Lord, I'm just going to ask a simple prayer. Lord, please bless this reading of your word and this teaching. And God, help us all have discernment. We live in a dark spiritual world that we're constantly under attack. And it's weirder than we probably know. And no, I mean, not probably, Lord, it is weirder than we know. And thank you for leading this passage in here to teach us that. Help us be safe in your knowledge, God, in knowledge of you and the knowledge of your truth, and protect us from the enemy and his evil ways. We ask that in your holy name. Amen. All right. Well, get a sip of coffee. And let's go ahead and open up 1 Samuel chapter 28. Hope you got a chance to look at it. So in those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, "Understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army." And David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." So David, if you remember from our last time, he's been driven over to the Philistine side to get King Saul to stop trying to hunt him down to kill him. While he's in his presence, he's earning the trust of the king of the Philistines, Achish. And as we'll see, the other commanders aren't so trusting, whereas the king seems to be. But let's pick it up in verse 3. Now Samuel had died. Remember, prophet Samuel, for whom this particular book is named. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. So you have 2 armies facing each other, 2 nations. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by prophets. Dead silence from the Lord. He's on his own. So now Saul, wanting this spiritual guidance, does something. So he then said to his servant, "Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servant said to him, "Behold, there is a medium at En-dor." Some translations actually say the witch at En-dor. Okay. But she's one who communicates with the dead and dark spirits and all this. And again, this may challenge your worldview of whether or not there are ghosts, or whether once we're away from this body, we're in the presence of the Lord, whether or not we could be brought back by any sort of spiritual means. We're just going to read this passage. We'll take it for what it is. I think there's a lot of twisting of this passage to get it to say things that fit people's theology. I'm not going to do it. We're just going to take it as it is. So let's hear it. Okay. So Saul, this is King Saul, disguised himself, and he put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night, and he said, divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. The woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? But Saul swore to her, by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. So then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. So he's still in costume. Samuel shows up. I hear some pastors, again, they'll twist this passage and say, oh, she was a fake. And when she actually saw a spirit show up by God's providential, powerful direction, she cried out. She was scared. Like she had been fooling people with just tricks, right? I don't think that's what's happening here. That's not what the text says. That's a convenient fitting together of a theology into the passage, right? Something about when Samuel shows up here causes her to cry out and know that it's Saul that's in disguise, okay? So let's take that. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You're Saul. The king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. He said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Now, why is he coming up out of the ground? Why does he look like a god? All this stuff. Here's my most simple explanation of how I see it. So, in the timeline of reality, okay, at this point in reality, Jesus had not yet died on the cross, let alone being born, right? He had not died on the cross or rose from the grave. And it says that after he rose from the grave, Peter says that he went down and preached the good news to those below the earth, in the darkness, right? When we hear the parable about that Jesus tells us, well, I don't have time to teach all this. Okay, so my point is I think that they had not yet been brought up to glory into the presence of the Lord yet, but they were in a place of waiting, and that it symbolized both metaphorically and I think spiritually is that they were held in a place that is below the heavens, okay? And that he's being brought up into her presence. So he has not yet gone to the marriage supper of the Lamb or any of that stuff that we read about in Revelation or talked about by Jesus in Matthew 24 and 25 and all that, okay? So that's why you have him kind of coming up, and he looks like a god because he's dressed in this, way that we see all the saints dressed, right? In this glowing way. And before you get on her about calling him a god, remember that even John, the apostle, who was brought up into the presence of Christ himself and knew that he was seeing some wild stuff in heaven, bowed down to an angel to worship the angel, right? And he had to be rebuked. Don't do that, right? Okay, let's get back to it. Verse 15, then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me. God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. And Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you? and become your enemy. Why are you asking me? What do you think you're going to get out of me? Did Saul ever think that Samuel would do something other than what the Lord did? But his point, it's a mute answer, right? It's a rhetorical question, right? Okay. The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, David. Verse 18, because you didn't obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow, you and your sons shall be with me. You're going to be brought down to, the dead. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. Now, this is a place where people kind of lean into and think of it as a purgatory, as a holding place. I don't believe that's the case. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. I referred to it a little bit earlier in what I was explaining. I believe that this is a time and place before the resurrection of Christ. This is before the wedding supper of the Lamb. This is before some of the final events of earth. So I think that when Christ died, he went down, preached the gospel, and brought those people that had been in a holding place. So on the other side of our time-space continuum, where we sit right now, you and I, there is a whole spiritual reality in a world in their timeline, and it sort of coincides with ours, and it sort of doesn't. It's you see it sort of operating a little bit differently. However, in this sense, you have sort of a coupling between the two, okay? In that they're kind of going together until Jesus dies, buried, resurrected, goes and preaches the gospel to those who are dead, okay? Then Saul fell at once full length on the ground, and he was pretty upset, and we aren't going to read all this, but basically he's going to fast, and then he decides not to fast, and the witch is just like, we got to get some food in this guy and get him on up out of here. Okay. The longer he's in her presence, the more likelihood it is she's probably going to die no matter what he had promised, right? So she's like, she feeds him and they get him on up out of there. Okay. So chapter 29. So the Philistines reject David. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. So the king's in the back, all the other warriors and the captains and all that, they're kind of moving past the king, and David's standing there with the king of the Philistines. Mind you, on the other side of things, on the other side is Israel with Saul, presumably, okay, at Gilboa. So all these commanders, they'd say to Achish, is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who's been with me now for days and years since he deserted to me and have found no fault with him to this day? That's what Achish is saying to all his commanders that are asking, why is he here? And David had been proven faithful to this guy, right? Well, they have a problem because they even know the song, the top, number one hit in the land. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. Remember that one? And so they know, they think he's a sleeper, and kind of is, right? But David is honoring his word, and he's living peaceably in the land, and he's fighting the other enemies. But now they're the other enemies of the Philistines, which ultimately are enemies of Israel. But mind you, now they're set up to fight Israel. And now the commanders have a problem. They're like, well, wait a minute. He's not going to actually go fight his own people. Okay. So Achish listens. Finally, he's like, you know what? I'm going to send you away. I'm going to send you back. David's like, I'll be faithful. It's like, no, you know what? I gotta do right by my other commanders and send you back. So, chapter 30. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag On the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. Now, Ziklag is where he had been given a place for his people to live, little town. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. They had gone to stand against Israel with the king of the Philistines, do right by the word that they gave, but they're still nonetheless standing against Israel. Eventually, they're told, look, I can't argue against my commander, says the king. I send you back. But while they're gone, their little town and the whole area gets raided by the Amalekites. Okay, and they're just destroyed. They're broken. They think they're all probably dead, taken away for sure, right? Because they're in a bunch of dead bodies. But it's horrifying. The people that they went out to protect, in a way, they weren't there to protect. Okay. And I don't know if you cried till you had nothing left. I don't know if you have. If you have, you kind of know where David and his men were at. So verse 5, David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord and his God. So everybody, even the people that had trusted him and followed him all the way into the Philistines and fought so many battles and this and that, and David had saved their butts so many times, right? This is a bridge too far for them. They've lost everything they love in their families, and they're ready to kill David and just be done with it. But David, when everybody turns away from him, what does he do? He strengthens himself in the Lord. Okay? And when everything falls away from your soul, your life, your circumstances, when you have nothing left, all your people, all your family, your country even, he's in the land of the Philistines. Everything is gone. What do? You going to die like Saul will here in another chapter? Just decide not to try and fight for life to the very end, but you're going to commit suicide and fall on a sword? You going to give it up? Or are you going to turn to God? You're going to humble yourself in that moment and submit your life to the Lord and let the Lord be the one who delivers you. Okay? Are you going to trust and strengthen yourself in the Lord? Yes. Yes. And God will. Okay, verse 7. David said to Abiathar, the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake him? He answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. How did this work? We have the ephod, and we have the ark back in Israel, and we've got the Urim and the Thummim, and we have these objects, right, which are holy and set apart for the Lord. And somehow being in the presence of these things which have been set apart for the Lord, commanded to be made by the Lord, by the way. These things have been set apart for the Lord. They are holy. They're of the Lord. And that when the priest and David inquire, the priest on his behalf inquires, mediates for him to the Lord in the presence of this item, they get a clear answer. Okay, they get a clear answer. Now, other cultures in Christianity, other factions or divisions or parts of Christianity greatly value icons. In the case of Eastern Orthodox Church, there's a great deal of them. And I don't want to say this as a negative. This isn't a negative. They have more of the mystical sense of Christ. They have icons. They have pictures that represent situations from the scriptures and in meditating on them in a place of worship, clarity comes to them on who God is and what life is all about, who they are. We in the West tend to focus on the structure of sentences and the concepts and ideas that are communicated thereby, okay? And we'd say that's more true, right? I don't think so. I think that there is a mix of truth in the world, and that true is what is true to the Lord. And the Lord is who verifies what is true. And I think just one quick example of how that works. So you have David here using a form of mysticism, if you will, an inquiry of the Lord in the presence of a holy object set apart for God through a priest to the Lord, right? That in itself is fairly mystical, okay? Okay, but for us, here we are reading the story about said experience, and it's our job to then do deduction and induction. We're here to make observations, right? Make those connections. And then by that, through a time of prayer, get away all the random thoughts of our life and weird, misidentifications of information. Go, oh, you know what? That's not what it says. It says this. Rightly understand. And then see the connections on the face, on the surface of it. And then think about what's going on here at another level. And then we get something of a revelation, and then we attribute that to God's Spirit. Well, that's a little bit mystical too, because at that moment it says that faith comes from hearing, and hearing comes by the word of God, right? That's a mystical reality. We just don't attribute that, because we could pick up a book, I don't know, like Black Beauty. My wife's been reading me that great book, and teach me things about horsemanship and things from the point of view of a horse that it was written. And it's like, well, we could deduce things from that book. And so we're just deducing cold, hard language out of a book, and there's nothing mystical about it. But the Bible says faith itself, right? Seeing that which can't be seen. Read Hebrews, okay? Great chapter on faith. Guess what? There's a mystical aspect of just reading this book and having God open up our heart and our mind to the reality that's there, and then the applications that come from it. Okay? So, I digress. David inquires, and he's given the go-to to go hunt him down and save his people. And a couple hundred of the people they're too wore out. They can't even go with him. And in verse 16, when he had taken him down, behold, they were all spread abroad all over the land, eating and drinking and dancing. This is his enemies, right? Because all the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped, except for 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoils, or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. And David also captured all of the flocks and all the herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, "This is David's spoil." Okay? So then they came back to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been left at the brook of Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, "Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil." That's all the stuff they gathered up in battle. That we had recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart. And here's David's righteousness. But David, verse 23, said, "You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us." You didn't get it, the Lord did it. You just fought this insane battle from, ever, right? It was forever day, battle, right? And you killed everybody. You had this incredible victory. That wasn't you. Even though you're doing it, that was the Lord giving you victory. Remember, I asked God, should we even do this? And then God said, yeah, go do this. Then we had victory. That was the Lord. Okay? Give God the credit. Okay? So, But David said, "You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike." And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. So when David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord." It was for those in Bethel and in Ramoth and of the Negev in Jetir, in Arar of Shipmoth and Eshtoma, in Rakal, in the city of the Jeharamelites, in the city of the Kenites, in the Hormah and the Borashan, and the Akath in Hebron, for all the places where David and his men had roamed. He basically sent back to all the places that he had been. Remember, prior to going over to the land of the Philistines, all the places basically, kind of hit him out at different points in times when Saul was chasing him down. He sent an offering to bless them. So, chapter 31, the death of Saul. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, and Abinadab, and Malchi-Shua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. It's like, I don't want to be the one put my hand against the Lord's anointed, right? Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and beyond the Jordan saw it, the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. It was a complete rout. But more to the point, Saul, instead of going down swinging, he decided yet once again, instead of finding strength in the Lord, even at the very end of ends, even falling down, bleeding out from arrow wounds, to just go, okay, you know what, Lord, you're right. I've been, an awful man, and to repent and to just give whatever he had left to the Lord. He tries to get his armor bearer to kill him. And then when the armor bearer won't do it, he decides to take his own life. So when he despairs of life, what does David do? What does David do? Well, we know. He leans into the Lord, into the endurance, the sustaining authority and power. How do you do that? You do what I just suggested that Saul did, right? You just lay yourself before the Lord. You're like, here I am, Lord. This is all I am. And I don't even know all that I am. Here's all my wrong. Here's all who I am. Whatever good I have in life, it's yours. You let me do it. Here I am. I need you. You're all I got. I don't got nothing else. I don't even got my own strength in my own life. I'm yours. Right? That's how you do it. Then what, Zach? Well, you wait on the Lord. You listen to his word. You hear a song that you may have heard about the Lord. You turn away from any temptations that the world might throw at you in those moments. The temptation to take control of your life at the very end and take it. You lay that down. You push that away. You continue to seek the Lord. And guess what? A miracle will happen. God will show up. God will show up. How? being a still small voice. It might just be the strength that came from outside of you that you know that is not me. That is not some weird spiritual enemy. That's not some dark thought. That is a hopeful word from God, and you'll know it. It might say, get up. And it might be, that's all it is. And from that point forward, you have now the strength to go forward. It may be something grander. You might be given a vision. You might see something. God might bring to mind a verse or a passage of the Bible. And he might guide you through that. I don't know. But I can tell you the doorway, the pathway is not to kill yourself. It's not to check out. That's not your job. That is not your job. Your job is to lay it all down and to give yourself to the Lord. And then God will let you have, he'll give you agency over your own life. He'll give you control over decisions and matters. Of course, he wants you to have that. He gives you wisdom to do that. Of course, he'll speak to you and give you guidance here and there about direction. You aren't like letting somebody else just sort of like control you with a joystick. Although, wouldn't it be great if God did, because you'd always do the right thing. But you wouldn't get the joy of getting to do it with the Lord. So God's going to give you personal agency in your life with him. But you got to lay down your life to the Lord. Saul did not. He laid down his life to himself. And that is the difference between David and Saul. Saul thought he could do it in his own strength. And David knew he couldn't. Now, David will have flaws, and we'll get back to those as we go. But Saul thought he could do it in his own strength, and even went all the way to the end in his own strength, falling on his own sword. And David couldn't, and he wouldn't. And he trusted in the Lord. All right, well, hey, 2 Samuel, day 420, all right? God bless you, and keep walking, okay? Bye-bye.